Hello again, and welcome to this global webinar. My name is Tim Hodges, and I'm very pleased to be here to moderate today's session. As you can see, the title of the webinar is Report and Reflection on the Informal Global Dialogue on DSI and the Cali Fund. This webinar is being brought to you by the DSI Informal Dialogue Partnership, which is supported by the Government of Norway and the European Union. With so much going on, both formally and informally on DSI, we thought it would be timely to share with you some perspectives on discussions that took place in Leuven in Belgium in March, and also not only that, but also to get some updates of what's happening out there on DSI and what's also being planned over the next several months towards the COP. As you will see, there's an impressive amount of work and discussions taking place. And I know that many of you cover more than one issue, so I do trust that you'll find this webinar valuable. I know I have a hard time keeping up on DSI. We have Mary Chiachi from the European Commission standing by to make some welcoming remarks. This will be followed by a report on the Informal Global Dialogue on DSI and the Cali Fund, a Leuven meeting, which Suhail will review. And then we will move to the panel. And we're very fortunate to have some distinguished and well-known panelists today. And we will introduce them further when the panel session begins. Then we will move to an update segment, first on the formal process, and those updates will come from, of course, the Secretariat, Convention on Biological Diversity from Charlotte and Kirsty. And then we have a number of updates from the DSI Informal Dialogue Partnership that will be delivered by Andreas, Julian, and Suel. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we will have a Q&A session drawing comments and questions from the chat. And then briefly, some closing remarks from Ida Helmark from NORAD from Oslo. So once again, welcome to the webinar. Let's actually move to some opening remarks. But before we do so, and this is the part that I find not just informative, but actually kind of fun as well. We have a poll asking you where you're from, what region you're from, as well as I think there's at least one other question there. Here we go. Yes, and so what sector do you represent? So please, if you would, respond to this questionnaire. Shouldn't take much time. Though I'm curious, Stefan, we've got under region, we've got other, and I guess I'm not sure what other would be in this case. Maybe the high seas or maybe the Antarctica. I'm not sure. And we'll reveal the results immediately, so everyone will have a sense of who is in the room. So at least 2% are from other. Fascinating. So Asia Pacific, Eastern Central Europe, Western Europe, Africa, Latin America. All right. And the sectors, can we see that completely? So predominantly government, perhaps that's not surprising, certainly not to me. So this will give everyone a general sense of where people are coming from and from which sector as well, except for the mysterious others. Thank you very much, Stefan, for that. And thank you everyone for responding. Well, Mary, thank you very much for your patience. I'd ask you please if you could turn your mic on, and we would very much appreciate your words of welcome and any other remarks you might have. And everyone knows who Mary Chiachi is from the European Commission, and I believe it's the Environment DG. Yes. So over to you, Mary, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tim, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. I think it is really a great pleasure to see that there's so many people registered, so much people registered for this webinar. I think also from the information that the organizers have shared with us, we had a very high rate of registrations, which shows the continuous interest that there is for this topic, for the Cali Fund, and in general for digital sequence information. As Tim said, the purpose of this webinar is precisely to share with the broadest audience possible the outcomes of this workshop that we had in Leuven in last March. Maybe just allow me to recall that the workshop is part of a broader series of informal events that we have called Global Informal Dialogue on DSI, and that the European Commission, together with the Government of Norway, are sponsoring and organizing, with the intention actually of offering a friendly, informal sitting to discuss issues related to DSI and the Cali Fund. This came a little bit as an idea after more than a year from the adoption of Decision 16/2 in Cali, and the establishment of the fund, where we could all notice a bit that the fund is having somehow some challenges to affirm itself as a successful fund. There are also not many occasions before COP17 for this type of informal exchanges among parties, private sectors, indigenous peoples and local communities, stakeholders in general. So the idea of these events is precisely to offer these informal opportunities to dig into the issues, to try to build common understanding, and also to build trust in the system, because this is actually an aspect that we have really addressed also at the occasion of the meeting of the workshop in Leuven. There is apparently a need to understand better what the mechanism, how the mechanism works, but also to build trust in the system itself. And this is a bit the effect of having something new there. The Cali Fund is certainly, and the multilateral mechanism to share benefits. There are a little bit of some new animals outside there, especially in the area of biodiversity. So we have realized that there is a little bit of additional need for this type of exchanges, precisely to continue supporting and promoting the implementation of Decision 16/2. So this was with these objectives in mind, we have then conceived the workshop in Leuven. The workshop, I have to say, was, I mean, from our perspective at least, very successful. It brought together over 40 representatives from parties, CBD parties, indigenous peoples and local communities, industry, civil societies, also some experts of digital sequence information and other technical experts. It was also widely appreciated by participants and demonstrated somehow the value of having these informal physical meetings, exchanges in person, which helps a lot beyond the formal negotiations to find a common ground or a common language, at least amongst the key actors. The discussions were really rich thanks to very constructive approach and participations by the participants. I think they really help to improve mutual understanding on key technical aspects, but also to build momentum around the multilateral mechanism and the Cali Fund, and precisely then to help building trust in the system. And these are essential elements for the credibility and the long-term success of the mechanism, from our perspective, at least. I think, I mean, the colleagues will debrief and will explain all the different aspects that were explored. But overall, there were two key messages coming out from this workshop that I wish to stress. One is the fact that beyond the political agreement that has been reached at Cali in 2024, we all realize that there is still some work that remains to be done to make the system fully operational and workable in practice. And that despite the difficulties, there is a strong will actually to make it work and to try to address the remaining challenges there. For these reasons, there was this idea of starting to test the system, of piloting the system, which I mean, we all found very, very interesting. I will not dig into this, but it's certainly an important aspect, and the colleagues will elaborate more on this later. And the other important aspect is that there's a need also for changing a little bit the narrative around the Cali Fund, the narrative on success of the Cali Fund. There's this trend of looking at the Cali Fund, actually at the amount of finance generated under the multilateral mechanism and how much is in the Cali Fund to assess its success. But from the meeting in Leuven, we looked into all the steps that have been made until now, what it has been achieved also in terms of institutional progress, and in particular at the willingness that there is out there to make this thing work, and at the same time that the understanding that still something else is needed to facilitate and to improve the functioning of the system. And all this together brought to the conclusion that, we don't have to assess necessarily just on the amount that is in the fund, the success of the fund, but this could be measured also in light of the progress made in operationalizing the mechanism, in strengthening its institutional framework, and also to some extent through this willingness to start testing the system. And I think also in this regard that this was a very positive message coming out of the meeting. So in general, I think this type of occasions really offer opportunities for enhancing dialogue amongst all the relevant actors in the lead up to COP17. And we wanted to offer this opportunity to share with the broadest audience the outcomes coming out of that meeting in order to not to waste them, let's say, and build on them as much as we can. So for the European Union, the workshop was certainly an important and positive step forward, and we hope we can continue working together with the Government of Norway and all other interested actors on these lines to be able to show progress by COP17. And I think I will not take much more time from the other panelists, and I can stop here. I hope you will enjoy the webinar.
Thank you very much, Mary, and for your welcoming remarks, and for highlighting some of the highlights of the Leuven meeting, to which I was privileged to be a part of. So thank you very much. Speaking of the Leuven meeting, next we'll have Suella Janabi from GeoMedia in Bonn to say a few words about the dialogue that took place in March, and I think that'll include a short recap of the dialogue's agenda, some of the topics that were discussed in Leuven, and importantly, of course, some of the outcomes of 3 days of talk. Suelle, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot, Tim, and also Mary for the introduction. Hello to everyone. I hope I'm audible. I'm probably having the most boring part of this meeting, because I assume that many of you have already read the report, and also Mary highlighted some of the key aspects of the meeting in Leuven. But as it's going to be the basis for the later panel discussion, let me allow to walk you a little bit through what happened, and maybe with the next slide and the overview of the agenda. As Mary said, we had some 40 representatives. It was a mix of government, private sector, IPLCs, academia, international organizations such as the treaty. So all regions were represented. We had a bit of a problem, of course, because it coincided with 2 major strikes in Belgium. So that was one logistical aspect, and the other logistical challenge was that due to the war in the Gulf regions and the closing of airports, some further representatives that wanted to come weren't able to make it. There were last-minute changes, but all in all, we had a really good turnout in terms of participation. And as you see, the 3 days were structured in because it was the first informal meeting and in-person meeting after COP to get back to track, to set the scene, and also to identify the main construction sites that Decision 16.2 left over. So where is further work to be done, and on which can we build? You do see the themes there. The main day was certainly the day 2, moving forward, were some of the key issues that were clear that required more discussion and analysis, like in the money in part, what are the benefit sharing obligations, the trigger points, the question of stacking, overlapping obligations, be it with national obligations, be it with other fora, but also on the money out part, how to deal with this direct and indirect allocations to indigenous peoples, local communities. Key question, of course, how do we track, trace that, the accountability regarding the use of funds, and then in the afternoon, a very prominent question, of course, on how to incentivize private sector and to de-risk contributions, as well as how could then some criteria, minimum criteria for disbursement for money out trigger then contributions. The day 3, as you see, we dedicated to a quite important topic, which is not that much on the agenda generally, but we see it as a key element, which is, of course, in the non-monetary benefit sharing and the question of capacity development. And then I put in yellow the aspects of the pilots and test phase that was initially not planned, but based on the real intense discussions on day 2 and basically hearing from everyone that there is a need to test and to pilot and to get started, we then decided with the group to change the program a little bit and to let in group work then participants work on how potential test phases and pilots could work. And then, of course, a bit of a roadmap outlook and so on. So that's the overview. Next, within the more topical issues, it's also here something that Mary said. I think summarized in terms of mood, it can be that people thought, well, 16.2 is certainly not perfect, but it's a basis to work on for everybody, so for all stakeholders and governments. And also that general feeling that, okay, we're done with negotiations, we need now to think about technical work, operationalization, and also on which we can build. And there's also, of course, now a governance scheme, which is great, but of course, and this is why we met and we will meet in future, some uncertainty that's remaining on questions of definitions, the scope, the modalities, and so on. As I said, the key construction sites and in clusters, money in, incentives, so what are the motivations to put money into the fund, the legal certainty. There was a lot of discussion on the question of the certificate, what would that be, what would it stand for, certificates in other fora, questions of overlap in that regard. In money out, what would be the funding models for IPLCs? How could one think about accountability? What level of accountability would be necessary? And then when it comes to non-monetary benefit sharing, where we also have the mindset of a bilateral approach, how can we incentivize and trigger this matchmaking in a more anonymous way, the definitions and the borderlines between capacity development, tech transfer, and non-monetary benefit sharing, and more as cross-cutting issues, the trigger points, awareness raising within the conventions, within the private sector, and then the coordination of all of it. Just to mention some of the aspects being highlighted. Next, there is Then, of course, Mary mentioned it, the question of trust, because we are a little bit in a stalled situation that private sector is waiting for parties to move, parties are waiting for the private sector to move. So how can we, with intensified and better trust, then unlock the situation through improved collaboration of the formal bodies, and also trust building within this angle industry, IPLCs, and parties through transparent processes. And that, of course, the more we see tangible results and a step-by-step moving forward, of course, this would then improve and enable trust. So it's this learning by doing, and with that, trust building was the thrust of the overall dialogue. When it comes then to the questions of incentives, legal certainty, and ethics, underlining the need for legal certainty to incentivize contributions, again, back to this question, what would a certificate stand for? What license to operate would private sector get? Construction side of the potential regulatory fragmentation between the different fora, fear of duplication, something to work on, and this fine line. On the one hand, you do have, of course, open access, and that needs to be balanced with fair benefit sharing. That this is something, of course, that one needs to take into consideration. It was often said that it is not only an obligation, compliance obligation, to contribute to the fund, but also from a business perspective, kind of an ethic responsibility. And as I said, accountability, transparency with respect to allocations and disbursements. And quite an interesting discussion is, of course, what is it that we want to get out of it? The impact, basically, of allocations to countries, to IPLC. How could that be assessed? What kind of indicators would be necessary? So all this, as you see in different formats, was discussed. This is now a statement of written discussions from Leuven. Next. So. As Mary said, as I said, as we went along, there was more and more. It was clear that kind of an approach, learning by doing, should be outlined. And in that regard, groups then found together subgroups that developed 6 different pilot approaches that looked at different elements of money in, money out, or only the certificate. How could that be tested? I will say some words on that in a minute. So in a forward looking approach, it was said that of course knowledge needs to be more combined. There's a need for more dialogue, probably also on pilots and test phases, on this learning by doing, and that we need to focus on unresolved issues and discuss them, find solutions for COP17. So in an overall conclusion, one could say the foundations for the multilateral mechanism and the Cali Fund are in place. Process definitely being made, but we need also to be realistic that this is a new approach. Some said that it is a radical new approach that needs, of course, time, as it's a new system, and also a new approach to CBD, something multilateral. Tangible implementation is the basis for trust, and that we need also simple, transparent, coordinated systems for benefit sharing, so that it shouldn't be overcomplicated. And once again, iterative approach, dialogue, testing, learning, and maybe piloting. And now allow me just to say some words on these discussions we had on pilots. Yeah? So there were commonalities. All the 6 groups we established, and all opted for this, for the need to test and refine the Cali Fund before full implementation of the system, and looking in particular at the financial flows, so money in, money out, governance questions, but also the practical feasibility of concepts under negotiations. Testing and feedback loops, and then evaluation against KPIs and defined criteria necessary, because we need to have something in place at COP18 to evaluate, because of course that's what has been decided, and that of course also in any kind of testing, then all stakeholders and parties would need to be involved, and pilots could indeed vary in terms of their scope, what's going to be tested, but as a prerequisite, of course, that all actor groups have to be part and parcel of it. Transparency, accountability, legal certainty, question of reporting systems and KPIs also relevant for potential test phases, and that we need already have at the end of the day a proof for fair and effective benefit sharing. Last slide from my end is, of course, that as we only had half a day for the pilots, a lot of questions were then flawed. As you see them here, and they might also be then part of the later panel discussions. Okay, what would be the aspects of the system? Which elements would require some testing? Which are the most complicated, complex ones? Who would be willing to participate in such a pilot? Yeah, what is the relation of pilots to the formal process? Timelines and boundaries. Yeah? So when would such a testing need to be ended also with respect to COP18 and the review process? If we look at them, we need to see whether they work or not. So how and who would the pilots be evaluated and assessed? But definitely they should help strengthening the business case and also to incentive then private sector industry to pay. How can we attain this? There would be a need for, of course, sponsorship. Would that be already then contributions from private sector in the first phase? Others one could think of, and something that later on also came into play was the question, aren't there also other environmental funds, global, that had pilot phases, and many had, and what lessons can we draw from that? So I'll leave it at that, and back to you, Tim. I hope this gives a bit of an overview on what happened in Leuven.
Thank you very much, Suel. Not an easy task to encapsulate such a rich and diverse discussion that took place at the dialogue. And I can assure you, your presentation really wasn't that boring. Thank you. Now let's move to the panel segment of the webinar. Stefan, if you could please bring the slide up for our panelists. Here we go. I see that we're running late, and I do not want to. I want to change that trend. So I won't spend too much time introducing our panelists. I think many of you will know at least some, if not all, of our panelists, and they're joining us from South Africa, from Indonesia, from Bogota, Colombia, UK, and Bart, I think you're in the Covington's Brussels office, and Danielle from DRC was actually actually not at home today, but welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining and preparing for this panel discussion. You were all there in Leuven. You were all very active, as I recall, and I think you have brought home with you from Leuven some clear thinking, I hope, but also some questions as well. So let's begin with, we have two questions. We'll do two rounds, posing the first question. We'll go around the panel, and then I'll pose the second question, and we'll do it again. So let me actually pose the question, our first question for the panelists. So, first question is, looking back on the March dialogue in Leuven, what are your strongest impressions of where you felt there was broad understanding among participants, and conversely, where there was significant divergence of views or understanding? One more time, looking back at Leuven, what are your strongest impressions of where you felt there was broad understanding among participants, and also where there was some significant divergence of views or understanding? We'll start first with Natalie, followed by Gono, Gustavo, Katie, Bart, and Danielle. Natalie, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much, Tim, and good afternoon to everyone. The question, my memory to remember exactly what we discussed. All I know, it was very successful. But some of my reflections, my strongest impressions on the broad understanding in particular stems from how participants are now seeing the Cali Fund more as a symbol of fairness. And that this landmark achievement as the first operational step toward ensuring the benefits from DSI are shared equitably. It has gained a lot of political momentum since COP14, and its existence demonstrates that parties can move from principle to practice. I also noted a stronger acceptance for IPLCs as the custodians of knowledge and resources, including DSI, and that benefits to IPLCs in their efforts toward biodiversity conservation is key. Another area of broad understanding was the continued efforts to have practical and simple processes, and that trust building through transparency and dialogue are prerequisite for a workable multilateral mechanism. I was also encouraged that all participants saw the value of non-monetary benefits and leveling the playing field through capacity building on the use of DSI. And then lastly, I was also pleased that we finally raised the possibility for testing and piloting the system in particular areas. And then in terms of divergences in views or understanding, there was still this perception of the multilateral system being a voluntary system, and that industry needs to be incentivized to contribute to the Cali Fund. And my thinking personally is that the Cali Fund embodies the principle that benefit sharing is not a charity, but an obligation under international law, and recognition that global biodiversity is a common good requiring reciprocal stewardship. Further divergences that I also picked up on was how the funds will be disbursed to IPLCs, whether direct or via governments of the home country of those IPLCs. And then I think the very difficult area under ABS is how it's expressed across the various international instruments, also giving some uncertainties, creating this overlap of thinking, fragmentation of equity, and perhaps also some legal confusion, and this giving that possibility toward implementation paralysis. So that's my thinking and some of my reflections from the session. Thank you.
Thanks again, Natalie. We've now moved to Gono. Gono, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Tim, and good evening, good morning, good afternoon to all participants here. From my perspective, when I had involved in this dialogue, so the Leuven dialogue is a way to mutually understand perspective on issues that are still complex. This is a positive approach, but since many issues remain unclear, because within the original decision of the 16.2, meaning there is still a lot of the homework to be done. So from my perspective, I can see there is already a broad understanding from during the Leuven dialogue that we need still a clarity and legal certainty. Our participants agree that without a clear shared definition of DSI, it is impossible for the countries, in particular the mega biodiversity countries, to implement the fair and workable benefit sharing mechanisms. This was a rare point of consensus between developed countries, and the representative of the industry. The broad understanding, the second one, is that the importance of the Cali Fund for the non-monetary actors. There was a broad recognition that the Cali Fund fills a gap by capturing contributions from the sector that use DSI but are outside the traditional ABS chains. But again, since there is unclear about the mechanisms, there is still work to be done for how the Cali Fund should be disbursed within the fair and equitable. So, to me, there is still remain a significant divergence. The first one, as I mentioned earlier, that the scope and the definition of the DSI. This remains as the main sticking point. I can see that the developed countries and industry tend to waver on a narrow definition. Technical definition should be limited only to nucleic sequence. Whereas the other side of the mega biodiversity countries, I can see that there is a need of a broader concept of the DSI that includes the associated data, annotation, and potentially of the traditional knowledge. So without this alignment, we risk creating a system that excludes the very fundamental resource of the mega diversity countries. And the second divergence I can see is how the operationalization of the Cali Fund disbursement. While the principle was accepted, the practical mechanism raised concerns. There is still no clear agreement on governance, criteria for allocation, and how to ensure funds actually reach biodiversity-rich countries and also to the IPLC. Therefore, the transparency and direct access are non-negotiable issue, and the impression from the Leuven dialogue was there is still a need, a detail to be under exercise and need much more concrete proposal. And the last divergence from my side is the risk of the regulatory burden versus the innovations of the Cali Fund. Industry emphasized avoiding measures that could hinder research and innovations, whereas from the developing countries, the priority is preventing a system where access remains open, but benefit never materialize for the country of origin. In short, within the COP or the SPI, there is certainly a lot of the work need to be done. But from my personal view, from what we get from the Leuven dialogue, a piloting project would be something, a good leap approach, while the policymakers are still working on the definition and all the definitions. Perhaps putting a piloting approach is something that can accelerate about how the DSI fund can be, or the Cali Fund can be implemented. That's what I can give from my broad understanding and the significant divergence. I return back to you, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gono. Appreciate it very much. Just to remind everyone, the chat is open. I can see that has been really quite active, but please feel free. Gustavo, please. You have the floor.
Thank you, Tim. Can you hear me? This is working fine.
See, yeah,
Thank you. So after the COP, we knew that there were going to be an allocation at it. We knew that there was going to be a steering committee. Other than that, it was just going to be an internal work on the implementation and preparing for the next cycle. So first of all, I want to thank everyone who made possible that dialogue in Leuven, everyone who made it possible, because any opportunity to engage informally and to run ideas and to share concerns is well received. What I really liked about it was to be able to engage with parties, with IPLC, with industry and academia, to listen to those concerns, to share notes. Let's talk about the pilot and how would it work. There are things about the multilateral mechanism and the Cali Fund that can only be tested and known with it working and with it distributing benefits. So it all just shows that the multilateral mechanism and the Cali Fund really has great potential. The main message that I got is that there is a lot of interest in cooperating and continue to work together. The concerns that were shared mainly were the role of biodiverse countries. This talk about the incentives, about the double payments issues, the regulations on DSI. This talk about the equity and fairness, capacity building. There were lots of perspectives, but there were important subjects. The main difference is how to address them, how to address those concerns, because there are multiple ways to work in them. So I remember that after the COP, I remember that it was just seemed so far away, the next COP. And in Cali, we answered some questions. And during this intersessional period, we have, uncovered new ones. How do we make these payments work? How do we implement it in a way that is self-sustainable, that is not overburdened for the industry and for parties, that shares benefits in a fairly. So really looking forward to the next work, to the next cycles in the SSBI, with a fresh view to answer and to work on those questions. So thank you. Thank you, Finit.
Thank you very much, Gustavo. And seeing you reminds me, the last time we saw one another, of course, was in Leuven, and it was uncertain how you were going to get home to Bogota. And that in turn reminds me of just how difficult a period it was, and for participants to actually get to Belgium and get out of Belgium. There was a war going on. There was several strikes in Belgium, at least at the airport. So it was a testimony to your dedication for those of you who could make it, actually did make it. So thank you again. We now move to Katie. I believe, Katie, you're next, please.
Thanks, Tim, and hello, everybody. Good time of day to you. And it's really lovely to see all the colleagues previously speaking as well and to come back together as a group. I mean, I just reiterate what Gustavo just said about the importance of bringing people together in these types of informal settings to have these kind of discussions, because they really are productive, and we haven't had the same number of opportunities as we did in the lead up to COP16. So some of my quick reflections as well from Leuven. And I think there was this just general understanding across all participants that we do need to do something, right? That there is a need and an urgent need for all, including governments and businesses, to play a role in addressing the biodiversity crisis. And part of that could be through benefit sharing, and indeed should be through benefit sharing. And I don't think I heard anyone at the meeting disagreeing with that. I think a really strong theme that also came out in the discussion was how central trust is. That trust needs to be there, and trust needs to come from both sides. Otherwise, we find ourselves stuck without making any progress. And also the agreement that overall there needs to be progress and a demonstration of that progress by the time we get to COP17, CBD COP17 in Armenia later this year. I think there was also general understanding, general agreement, and several people have already mentioned it today, in fact, that progress could be in the form of running some kind of pilot. I think there was broad agreement on the concept of that, or general consensus. But I think the details of how that could be run, the extent to which it would stretch across the system as a whole or look at particular components of it, I think there was also kind of discussions that could be looked at in slightly different ways. And in fact, the two are really closely interlinked. By committing to testing the system and running some kind of pilot or test program, and by putting money through the system, would in fact help build that trust. It would foster partnerships and it would build up that trust and demonstrate that the Cali Fund can in fact play that part in meeting the objectives of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And then, Tim, on your second part of the question, well, what were the key divergences? I found that much harder to think about. But I think it is clear that there has to be more work in some elements, including some elements of the decision. And I'm just going to select one of them, and that is having the clearer understanding, which perhaps the decision didn't go far enough in looking at what legal certainty and providing the legal clarity. And that the Cali Fund is the benefit sharing mechanism for sharing of benefits from the use of digital sequence information in publicly accessible databases. So I think although there isn't necessarily a direct divergence on that aspect, I think that is one of the key areas where we need to come together more closely and do more work. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Katie. Appreciate it. Bart, over to you, please.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Tim. And let me just first echo what others said. I thought that Leuven was an extraordinarily valuable dialogue. And it really allowed us to think for the long term how we can scale biodiversity finance in practice. And I think, like other speakers have said, there's a strong shared understanding that that is really what we're doing here. We're trying to mobilize significantly greater financial resources for biodiversity. There's no question about that. So that's absolutely, I think, first point of convergence. And excuse me, that benefit sharing has a role there to play, and that the multilateral mechanism offers a real opportunity for innovation. So I think that's critical. Now, I do want to address, I think, what was a bit the elephant in the room is that the experience with existing ABS systems, the Nagoya Protocol and national ABS laws, shows, to be frank, that the level of biodiversity financing funding generated so far is relatively limited under the, especially if we want to meet the financing gap identified under the GBF. I've recently done the exercise of plowing through the national reports that were published under the Nagoya Protocol. There were more than 100 published. At least 60 countries have national ABS laws, and 2/3 of them reported zero monetary returns. And those that did report was honestly very, very modest, especially if you look at the ambition. So from my perspective, and maybe we didn't talk about the reports in Leuven, but there's really an implementation gap, a widely shared political objective to finance biodiversity, but the recognition that the system doesn't actually deliver the scale that is necessary. That doesn't mean that ABS doesn't work and has extraordinarily valuable cultural, ethical, and social importance. But when we look purely at the numbers, so far, we haven't yet managed to actually generate money at scale. And so I think that's important. And then shifting to other areas of convergence to reflect at what others said, there is a sense of urgency. We have a multilateral solution. We should embrace it. And I think that everyone in the room share that there is a need to demonstrate progress. And so in the long term, that means stable flows for biodiversity. In the short term, that may mean something else. As others have said, exploring how this multilateral solution can work in practice. So we have less than 5 months now to Yerevan. So I think that there was a shared urgency about what can we still do in the next 5 months to really push this forward and build on this momentum. In that respect, others have also mentioned trust. I found that discussion, to be honest, peculiar, if I may say so. I felt myself thinking, so who is not trustful of whom, and what are we actually not trusting each other about? So I think some earlier speakers have then said it's between business and government, which honestly I find too narrow. If I then took a step back and said it's maybe also more fundamental. It's maybe trust between governments, and maybe even more foundational, it's trust in multilateralism. It's trust in the fact that this system that we've established there across 196 parties may work rather than every individual national law. So I think that's an important one as well. Not to forget, it's not only evil business, evil governments coming together, it's trust in a bigger picture. And so for me, if I then look at the substance of trust for governments, I assume it is generate reliable financing for biodiversity. For companies, it is stability, foreseeable outcomes, allowing research and innovation. And so I do want to reiterate, a lot of us were there at from the private sector at the Leuven webinar, and what we stressed there as well is this is because we believe the multilateral mechanism can work, because we believe that this multilateral solution is something unique, and that we're contributing there, and that we're committed to contributing. So I think that's really important, and that also then to tie in to the shift in the nature of discussion that others have flagged about piloting. I think that at the beginning of the Leuven, we started, all of us, with repeating, if you will, our entrenched positions. And I think I wrote down what Natalie said. The implementation paralysis is something that we really need to overcome. I love that word. And I think in Leuven, we indeed had that. How can this system function under real world conditions? And so, Suhail, you summarized some of the key issues. We mentioned publicly available DSI. There's no common understanding of what that is and other terms. Should we define them? Shouldn't we? But for stakeholders, it makes it difficult to assess how the system is relevant to them. Also, the indicative contribution rates, of course, come up. Meaning of indicative, the rates, are they too high? Are they not? And here's another key challenge for me. I think it's less about the numbers per se, but it's about the lack of an agreed approach to determining value. As an earlier speaker said, some say, what is publicly available DSI? Is that really genomic sequence data in a very narrow sense, or are we really actually speaking about benefiting from nature? Depending on whom you ask, the answer is very different, and then the rates and the whole picture changes depending on your perspective there. So I think there is room for convergence there. And of course, being a lawyer myself, legal certainty, interaction between ABS systems. Look, we all know, for instance, the ABS regulations of India literally apply to digital sequence information. So if I've used publicly available digital sequence information from India and I paid into Cali, can I file my patent before the Indian authority without the Indian National Biodiversity Authority still expecting an additional payment? Clearest example of one-on-one overlap. And there are many other examples that I can tease out and happy to discuss, but this is something where we don't have clarity yet, and that's an absolute condition to overcome entrenched positions and operationalizing the mechanism. So just to summarize, I think we are strongly aligned on the objective of scaling biodiversity finance. Benefit sharing has a big role to it, but I also think that the systems should evolve and we should be ambitious to make it operational. And I know in round two, Tim, we can share some ideas. So happy to keep that for later on how to do that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Bart. Thank you. Now, last but not least for this round, Danielle, I trust that your connection is still yes, I see you coming on. You may not be able to use your camera, but we were able to hear you earlier. So please, the floor is yours.
No, thank you so much, the team, and thank you so much to the organizers of the global dialogue, and of course these informal dialogues are very important leading up to COP17 and from the decision taken in Cali. I think we are the centerpiece of all these negotiations, and I think the dialogue that we had in Leuven was very, very important. Speaking and at the position of, as we say in Africa, we are the church in the center of the village. And there were a lot of progress made in Leuven, and positive vibes were going on there about trust, about moving forward into making the decision 16.2 workable. And I think a lot of my colleagues, panelists, have said a lot of things, positive things about the commonality of what we had in Leuven. The convergent element that was there is how do we move the thing forward? How do we contribute? How do we see the way forward? But the divergent element was some of the stakeholders were still reluctant, were still not convinced on how to do it. And as Bart said, we kind of going through maybe having a broker between these stakeholders that are still a bit hesitant into moving the element forward. I think many of our panelists have taken a lot of elements, a lot of things that I could have said as well. And it was really, really a great pleasure to be part of this. And also, a positive thing that we found there was the inclusion of the 3 elements or 3 pathways of disbursement that were discussed by the Secretariat. And I think it gave us hope that in the coming days, we can have direct disbursement to indigenous peoples and local communities. I think I have it there, Tim. I'm a little bit scared because maybe my connection can go off, but it was really, really, really grateful to be part of this discussion. And another thing that I wanted to say is also the non-benefit sharing element of the discussion was very positive, because especially in Africa and other developing countries, we need this kind of developing our skills, our understanding. There was even an echo from parties, from African parties, to see how we can really well understand the DSI element and disseminate it into our different constituencies. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Danielle. We can hear you loud and clear. Let's hope we can continue to hear you loud and clear. Now we move to the second question, a second round, and I see that we're running significantly late, but let's see what we can do in terms of making up some time without pressing the panelists unduly. So let's start with the second question, and it's as follows. Based on the Leuven dialogue and your subsequent thinking, where should we focus our collective energies on to ensure a successful outcome on DSI and related issues at COP17? So again, the question is about what we need collectively to do and focus on related to DSI, obviously, for a successful COP17. We're going to start with Katie, followed by Gustavo, Gono, Natalie, Danielle, and Bart. Katie, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Tim, and I'll do my best to be succinct and keep us moving at pace. So what do I think we need to focus our collective energies on? I think it's really important to keep it really simple, because otherwise we become too dispersed. So first of all, really remember why we're doing this. Why are we trying to mobilize finance for nature at all? I think we all know that reason. I won't reiterate that. Next, I think we need to make sure that we don't operate in echo chambers. We need to engage actively. We need to engage widely, and that's the really importance of doing things like this. We've got over 300 people on this call. That's amazing. Okay, we need to reach out beyond those networks as well, even further. In governments, that means working with colleagues across other government departments. So those who are working in other forums and other multilateral processes and systems that are also developing and running benefit sharing mechanisms that deal with digital sequence information. So, for example, the BBNJ agreement, the International Treaty for Plant Genetic Resources, the Pandemic Accord, engaging across those to make sure that we have a cohesive and collaborative approach as well. And then the last thing that I will say is look at supporting existing initiatives. focus our energy, our collective energy, on those initiatives that are really working hard and trying to move us forward. One of those initiatives in relation to DSI and the Cali Fund is the Friends of the Cali Fund. We're looking to very soon launch a joint government statement from that group. And again, that's about collective ambition, collective energy, and collective focus to make sure that we can achieve our objectives. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you very much, Katie, for being so succinct. Gustavo, please. The challenge is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. I'll try to be as soon as I can. I think actually took some of the words from my mouth, because I think that we need to keep it simple, move fast, with purpose. I think we should focus on those things that could directly address some of the not issues, concerns, or questions that have surged over the past over the past 2 years regarding the Cali Fund. So the pilot program, addressing those things that we have identified, the most pressing ones. What can we do as parties realistically? What can everyone involved realistically do? The use of existing strategies. Moving resources for biodiversity is not exactly new. The Cali Fund can work and can fit along those existing strategies that are working right now, or that we are working to build right now. So yeah, focusing on using the existing strategies. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you very much, Gustavo. I appreciate being so brief as well and clear. Gono, over to you, please.
Okay, thank you, Tim. So to me, we might have to focus our collective energy to three priorities. The first one is agree on a clear operational definition of DSI and its scope. This is very fundamental, and this is the foundation. Without a shared understanding of what falls under the benefit sharing obligations, implementation will stall. Our focus should be on a definition that is technically workable, legally clear, and capture the reality of how genetic resources and associated data are used today. So for the developing countries, this means ensuring the scope is not so narrow that it excludes the value of the contributions. And the second priority would be the finalize a concrete, transparent mechanism for the Cali Fund. With this one, the principle of the fund, I believe it's widely accepted, but now we need to move from the principle to the practice. Collective energy should go into the defining governance, allocation criteria, and disbursement channels that the guaranteed fund research biodiversity and the IPLC directly can be transparent to be disbursed. Trust will only come with the clarity on how the money flows. And the last would be ensure policy coherence between the DSI, the Cali Fund, and definitely the national implementations. We need to avoid creating parallel systems that are unworkable on the ground. So we should focus on the aligning the global framework with the national ABS regime and the existing data infrastructure. Therefore, some key principle within the past document, in particular the definitions and the clarity of the disbursement, it is highly valuable and weighted by the parties, especially from the developing countries. Perhaps that's what I can say, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gono, again, also for your brevity as well. Natalie, I believe you're next.
Thank you. I was a little bit, you may have heard me. So I was saying that the focus of our collective energies, I think, should really give focus to operationalizing the multilateral mechanism for DSI, where we move beyond this principle to clear modalities, from the Cali Fund just being a symbol of equity to it being a functioning instrument of equity. And so the first area we need to give focus to is the governance of architecture. We need to establish clear rules and decision-making authority and representation also of the IPLCs. Then secondly, we need a mandatory contribution model to shift from voluntary and ad hoc payments to mandatory levies tied to commercial use of the DSI. This will then help us to ensure that contributions are predictable, proportional, and enforceable across the parties, and prevent free riding by harmonizing obligations internationally. My notes are disappearing. I'm not sure why, but nonetheless, I'm trying to think it from my memory. Thirdly, we also need to develop equity and empowerment indicators. So what I mean here is community-led indicators to measure whether benefits are reaching the custodians fairly, and embed these indicators in the M&E framework of the fund. Then last, I think we also need to ensure that there are synergies between all these different ABS instruments to avoid fragmentation. And so just in my conclusion, I thought that the Cali Fund has already been broadly welcomed. Stakeholders are clear-eyed. The success of this will depend on the governance design, equity safeguards, and genuine empowerment of IPLCs. And I see the mood really between or among stakeholders as one of cautious optimism, supportive of the fund's potential, but insistent that it must not become a symbolic gesture without real impact. So I think at COP17, there's a need for us to really work on the framing of this narrative and position COP17 as the moment to prove that digital biodiversity governance can be both fair and functional. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. With or without your notes, you're very clear and succinct, so thank you. I believe Danielle's connection has been broken. We'll all be familiar with being on the road outside our offices and not having adequate connectivity. So thank you again, Danielle, for being with us and lasting as long as you did. Appreciate it. Bart, over to you, please.
Thanks. So in thinking about the way forward, look, I was also following, of course, in the chat, and I think Nitin from TWN, you made the comment that it shouldn't be about incentivizing companies, and also Natalie earlier also mentioned it's less about incentivizing, it's an obligation. And honestly, nobody questions the third objective of the CBD. So if we don't call it incentivizing, I think let's call it creating the conditions under which participation in the multilateral mechanism can be scaled. And then I saw another comment in the chat that says legal certainty is just blabbering, or it's companies being insufficiently brave. Now, I find that an unhelpful characterization, because legal certainty, if I can just pin it down a little bit more, very concretely, what is happening right now? This is in the public health space, but we have the hantavirus outbreak and we have the Ebola outbreak. The Ebola outbreak was declared a public health emergency of international concern over the weekend. What does that look like from an ABS perspective? Well, the hantavirus sequence is publicly available on the INSDC and on Pathoplexus. So you will immediately get questions. Is it publicly available? Yes. So do I pay to the Cali Fund? But what would Argentina or Spain, if you got the sample from Tenerife, or what would the Swiss ABS law expect? So that's a real life scenario. Same with Ebola virus. Uganda and the DRC both have national ABS laws. The sequence is publicly available on the Pathoplexus. Before the declaration by WHO fake, the Cali Fund would apply. after the declaration of fake, the WHO perhaps would have applied. So those are real world scenarios where ABS creates questions. Unfortunately, R&D stops, people goes to their lawyer and ask, what am I supposed to do? So those are the real types of things that we should solve when we speak about coherence, non-duplication, legal certainty, and predictability, and creating a global governance system that is operationally feasible and can work on a global scale. And that's why I really liked the outcome in Leuven. Let's talk about technical design and not about entrenched positions, which we still see too much. And if I can also, Tim, I see you put your camera on, but one personal experience from the steering committee. To me, it's been hugely refreshing that as a private sector observer, we could participate in the discussion as equal participants. And if I may, to my mind, that is what will make this multilateral mechanism a success if we see it as a long-term public-private partnership between users and providers for the sake of biodiversity. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bart. And not to comment on your comments, but you remind me of how active in Leuven everyone was. That's not always the case in these sorts of dialogues, and it was very encouraging to see people feeling free and being really quite open. Thank you for that reminder. I see we've run out of time for the panel session, but nevertheless, and Bart, you've started it off, but before the end, I hope that you can use the chat panelists to further respond or provide comments to those active in the chat. You have an opportunity to do that via the chat rather than orally at this juncture. So thank you very much, panelists. Please don't go away. We look forward to your further comments and contributions in the chat. So now let's move to briefly to an update from the Secretariat, from the SCBD. And I welcome to the session familiar faces, Charlotte Jamet-Aubry and Kirsty Bryant, to say some words about what's going on, and there's certainly a lot going on the formal side. Over to you, please, and good morning in Montreal.
Good morning and good day, everyone. You have the pleasure of me starting. I will be quick because I'm not feeling 100%, but it is so refreshing to see you all again and to just listen in on the fascinating conversation and read the chat because, as ever, I'm inspired by everyone's views and appreciate hearing them all. So we're going to speak to you very quickly about the formal process on DSI and give some updates on some of the most recent meetings as well as some of the upcoming work. Next slide, please. So you hopefully all will be familiar with this slide now. We show it probably every presentation we do because it is a great explainer and reminder of the wealth of work that the formal process is doing on DSI and the wealth of work and how it will be split between the upcoming meetings. So to talk you through it very quickly again, and I will focus attention in SBI because that is a few short months away now. So SBI is only going to consider the things you see on green here. So the SBI will consider the tooth synthesis, which people submitted their views a few years ago now, the synthesis on possible new tools, models such as databases for making DSI available and accessible, and the synthesis on exploring the modalities and potential additional modalities of the mechanism. So those have been prepared by the Secretariat and will be published as pre-sessional documents. There is also the study on making DSI publicly available and accessible, as well as the review methodology. So only those will be the focus of SBI. We then have the COP, which will consider the SBI recommendations, as well as all the items you see in blue. So the report and advice of the steering committee, the RTEG's work on allocation formula, as well as the two remaining studies in blue. So just to recap your mind on that, next slide, please. I'm going to very quickly talk you through the most recent steering committee meeting as it was held just over a month ago now. You'll hopefully see some familiar faces in the picture we took in the beautiful, beautiful botanical gardens, which was where the meeting was hosted. Special thank you to Natalie, who's on the call, for her and her team for helping us organize this meeting. So you'll see we have published the provisional agenda that the steering committee followed at its meeting. As ever, and on quick glance, you see that the agenda is very heavy. So we usually start the steering committee meetings with more of the kind of, administrative, functional aspects of the Cali Fund. So the steering committee looked at the terms of reference, as well as a document on confidential information, as well as the manual of operations. The steering committee agreed a revision of the terms of reference, agreed to consider further the confidential information, and they worked on the manual of operations for the Cali Fund. So these are the kind of more procedural administrative aspects of the steering committee's meeting. You'll then see, if you look from item 6 onwards, they get into kind of more the substance of their work and the substance of their discussions. So they looked at the review methodology. They discussed, they discussed disbursements to Indigenous peoples and local communities, both in the interim and from a longer term perspective. They discussed certificates that are to be issued under 16.2, resource capitalization strategy, the pilot or testing phase of the Cali Fund, and they began to consider what actually they will be publishing within their report for the COP later this year. We have published the minutes. Please follow that link and have a look at them, because it goes into detail over all of these agenda items. And towards the end of the minutes as well, there's a useful section that summarizes the further work that the steering committee are now undergoing. So, for example, the steering committee are considering further the kind of pilot testing phase of the Cali Fund. They're considering further certificates to be issued under the under 16.2. They're also considering further disbursements for Indigenous peoples and local communities, and all of these will is expected to be reported on within its report to the Conference of the Parties. I will pause there and hand over to Charlotte, but please have a read of those minutes, and the meeting minutes from the second and first meeting are also available. And please also reach out to the Cali Fund email or any of the steering committee participants you see on the screen. Lovely to see you all, and I'll pass over to Charlotte for the remainder of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Kirsty, and good time of the day to everybody. My name is Charlotte Jeremy-Aubrey. I'm the lead officer on DSI and the Cali Fund at the Secretariat and colleague to Kirsty. So I'll take over and talk about the ATEG group, which is an ad hoc technical expert group, and they met for the first time in January online and decided on a very intense work plan, because as you might imagine, this is not an easy question to tackle. And they met online for 18 additional times in groups with different various subtopics, hearing from experts, inviting a lot of external experts to present on their work, the data they're working on, etc. And then finally they came together last week in Montreal in person to actually finalize this work and come together in consensus to propose something to the COP in October. So what they worked on was basically how to allocate the funds from the Cali Fund to parties, right? So the question, there's a wider question of disbursement, which goes to Indigenous people and local communities, and which goes to party governments. They were tasked specifically with the party government part. However, understanding very deeply what the Cali Fund allocation means and is in the eyes of the decision 15.9 and 16.2, they actually had the criteria from the COP on biodiversity richness, on country of origin of the genetic resources from which the sequences came from and are currently in public databases, and as well as the capacity need of a country for conservation and sustainable use of its biodiversity. The group decided that, obviously they were going to work on what the COP gave them as an indicative list, but also to add a fourth criterion on indigenous people and local communities and traditional knowledge contribution to biodiversity. So this formula and what they worked on actually had 4 components to them. And you can see that in the webpage of the meeting in Montreal last week. The report is not yet published. We're going to work really hard to publish this in the coming weeks. But you can have you can see the summary of what they did intersessionally. So all these 18 meetings plus a bunch of bilaterals as well, and all that work and what it came to is actually contained in one of the documents of the ATEG. So you're welcome to look at this. The report and the recommendation to the COP has 3 parts. There is a principles of the design of this allocation formula. There was a lot of talk about the foundation on which this allocation is being designed and the work is being done. There is the allocation formula itself, so it has 4 parts now, the 3 criteria from the COP and the additional one. And then there is a very solid recommendation for future work. We have short-term and more sort of medium to longer term recommendations to make this formula as solid as possible and sort of increasingly refined over time in terms of data and principle. And equity was also discussed a lot and is part of the principles and the allocation methodology itself. So hopefully in a few weeks you'll have the pleasure of reading this, and we look forward to you having access to this work. Next. So there is a lot of work that is going on as well under the CBD. So Kirsty showed you the graphic a little bit with the summary. We have several studies here. So one of the study examines DSI and its accessibility, its transparency and accountability in public databases. And a really strong study has been done on this, is being finalized, and will be available for SBI in August. So the executive summary will be posted in 6 languages and available 6 weeks ahead of the meeting. And then InfDoc in English only will have the full study with all the details that you can go and dig into. 2 other studies were requested to the executive secretary of the CBD. One was on national and international standards for small, medium, and large entities. And thank you to all those who have contributed to sharing information on this. If you recall, back in 2024, we had a notification on this. And then there is also a study on contribution rates, including implications for revenue generation to the Cali Fund, and also on economic competitiveness for companies. Because these 2 studies are so tightly linked, and some of the models that are economic models run for the study on contribution rate actually does have to take the idea of small, medium, and large entities into consideration. We decided to merge these 2 studies. And so the study number 2 here on the slide will be a chapter, sort of in the wider study on contribution rates. So that's something that will go to the COP directly. Thank you. Next. So here we can see that SBI will make recommendations on the study on the transparency and accountability of data, and then COP17 will see the merged studies. Next, please. Yeah, next. There's too many animations in the slide. So just to go back one, The merge study for the COP17 is a very important one. I know there's a lot of expectation on this. And so in order to make sure it is reflecting of everybody's realities and is factually correct, etc., and doesn't miss anything, we will have a peer review process, and it will start the week of June 8th. And everybody will have 3 weeks to read through the study and provide their comments to the Secretariat on this. So look out for that notification. Next, please. So to summarize a little bit, for SBI, there are 3 main topics. So there is a review of the effectiveness of the mechanism and the Cali Fund. A methodology has been developed. So the SBI will consider 3 main topics. So we have the review of the effectiveness of the multilateral mechanism and the Cali Fund. A methodology was developed by the steering committee, as is in its mandate in Decision 16.2. And this will be presented to the SBI by the steering committee. And then we'll have the study on the modalities of the fair and equitable sharing of benefits from the use of DSI. This is a synthesis that came from submissions of views on this topic and will be considered at SBI. And then lastly, the study we talked about on data transparency and accountability in databases and its accessibility by all parties. Next. So for SBI, which is the first meeting coming up, we will have 1 main document, the executive summary of the study, and then the methodology for the review. And then we'll have 3 information documents on the synthesis for additional modalities of the mechanism, also on accountability and transparency of DSI, and then the full study on transparency and accountability of DSI in public databases. Next, please. As a reminder, this is the email for the Cali Fund. We have the LinkedIn account on which you can follow some of the news that we have and some communication, and then the website that was launched recently on the Cali Fund, and that is particularly aimed at the general public and the private sector for their information on this. With this, thank you very much. And I don't know if we have a question time or if we wait for the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you, Kirsty. I would suggest that if there are questions, because we really are running seriously behind, if you'd be so kind to perhaps address them if they are raised in the chat via the chat, if that's acceptable, to the extent possible that you can reply. And thank you again. I did notice that the picture from Montreal for the ATTAG and the picture of the members of the steering committee in Stellenbosch, everyone was smiling. So that's a good sign, because I know just how hard the members have been working and how hard you've been working. So thank you for that. We'll now move to the informal process and provide updates. So there's lots going on in the formal side, and of course, lots going on in the informal side. And for that overview, we're going to start with I believe with Andreas, discuss some of the work that he's done and we've done on the possible pilot and testing options, and including a comparative, at least the start of a comparative analysis of what other pilots have done in the past and currently as well. And then that'll be followed by an overview of other work in the pipeline and that have been done, and Julian will provide that overview. So let's go to Andreas, please.
Yeah, thank you, Tim, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. As already mentioned by Zul in his overview of the Leuven meeting, everyone thought it would be necessary also to look into how other global funds have used pilots or test phases in their setup and in their further development. To this end, we started some research on how other global funds, especially in the environmental and health sector, have piloted and are using pilots and test phases for developing new financing instruments or implementation approaches to achieve their specific objectives. Next slide. The table here presents just a few of examples of global funds, demonstrating simply the variety of piloting approach and testing approaches used. Based on a screening of dozens of global and regional funds, it can be stated that institutional pilots are rare. Full institutional pilots are rare. Examples are for the GEF pilot phase in the early 90s and the first phase of the Green Climate Fund, the GCF, between 2010 20. There are different considerations whether it was until 2013 or 2015 after the first full rollout, and the pandemic fund also for the first round in 2023 was used as a proof of concept approach and testing governance issues especially. Basically, what can be said is that all global environmental and health funds are piloting or testing implementation-oriented instruments and modalities to optimize transaction costs, improve delivery against their objectives. This, of course, looks very often very different depending on the objectives and the setup of the fund, but generally it can be said the dominant trend is that pilots within funds are the rule, and the fund as a pilot is rather the exception. When looking at these funds, one point we need to keep in mind that all these funds are based and depend on funding by donors and philanthropists. Private co-financing is rarely exceeding 30%. Very often it's only just 10%. But there are useful lessons to be learned for the Cali Fund, which is intended as a completely privately funded fund by private businesses. What we will focus on our further research about the experiences and lessons learned of the other funds. We identified at this stage of our research 4 different types of piloting approaches with different relevance for the Cali Fund test phase. For the design of the Cali Fund, we have to consider 2 points: the current funding situation of the Cali Fund with almost nothing in it. The basic governance structures have been set with Decision 16/2 and are currently further elaborated by the steering committee, as we just heard. And of course, the outcomes of the dialogue in Leuven, especially the piloting ideas developed by the participants with a clear focus on the construction sites, money out and money in, and of course, considering the funding situation, also that it should be and must be or could be a limited demonstration pilot, what could be developed. Therefore, we will have a deeper look into the approaches and lessons learned by so-called funding modality pilots regarding direct access, especially direct access to funds by national or even local entities, and implications regarding accountability, monitoring and reporting, transaction costs, and devolved decision-making. All issues which have been mentioned several times during the panel as an important aspects to receive more clarity and to achieve more clarity. Regarding the money in discussions, it's difficult because none of the other pilots is in that aspect similar to the Cali Fund, but still we expect to gain some useful insights in the experience of various innovation and market shaping pilots, which are especially common in the health sector. Insights about incentives for the private sector to contribute actually to global funds and to engage with global funds. Parallel to this desk work, or basically desk work, we plan to do a series of interviews with persons involved in setting up and running pilot phases under other funds. That is still work to come. And with that, I'm at the end of my short overview to leave also some more time for the discussion and question and answer session on the chat. And I directly, Tim, if you allow, hand over to Julian.
Please, Julian. Thank you, Andres.
Excellent. Okay, well, hello, everybody from the chilly northeast of the United States. We are working very actively to try to foster discussions where these many topics that have come in, both in our live discussion, but also on the chat, are being addressed. There's so much to talk about. So if you can jump ahead to the next slide here, we will talk about that. So in person, we've done, of course, the meeting that we mentioned in Leuven. But the next stop in person that we have is planned for Utrecht in the Netherlands in June. And the idea there is that indigenous people and local communities and industry can gather together to exchange views and see what areas of convergence and divergence they identify with regards to the many issues that have been planted here, and ideally then help to communicate that map of issues to relevant parties and also to one another for potentially communication opportunities at the formal events. Later in the summer, northern summer anyway, we're going to do some regional conversations in the GRULAC area in Africa, in Asia Pacific, hoping to get a chance for parties in each region to exchange views, build capacity, and find solution pathways for the many things that remain unresolved and that we'll hopefully address at SBI and then at COP17 in Armenia. And in SBI, speaking of SBI, we're going to hold two side events. One to continue to, harvest the lessons that we've had from our many informal stops along the way. And also one that's going to focus on industry incentives, conditions for contribution, as Bart reframed it. I like that. And also the roles of investors. We think about industry a lot, but we don't necessarily think as much about how investors play a role in company behavior and in guiding and promoting certain actions in the international sphere. So we'll talk about that. Later in the year, in September, we're going to have another stop of something of a Leuven 2.0, if you will, where we will hope to share information, gather perspectives on the way to Yerevan. And then surely at COP17, we will put on some side events. There are many things in the works in terms of products for people to look at in terms of knowledge products. You just saw a preview of the first one from Andreas about other pilots and other funds. We are looking at this inter-instrument thing to look at both legal certainty, stacking, where other instruments begin and end with regards to DSI. DSI and gender is something that we're going to be publishing on in the coming months. And also, how do our NBSAPs relate to DSI and vice versa, and how can we guide all of our funding interventions by NBSAPs specifically as they relate to DSI? The non-monetary benefits conversation has popped up in the chat, though less so in our conversation here. We continue to work with partners to see how we can incentivize and account for non-monetary benefits and how the matchmaking of non-monetary benefits can continue to happen and improve. The clearinghouse has some approaches, and we think there's more to talk about there. A lot of implications for database managers came out of 16.2, and so we're looking to get some ideas on how databases can advance there, and also, of course, a lot of the other database conversations that came out of 16.2 were really interesting, and we think that deserves more exploration and clarity. So, continuing to try to work with people who know more than we do to try to come up with ideas about the databases. We're still, the question of who uses DSI, where are they, and in what measure, and to a certain extent, what value does that DSI have is the magic question, though that one's quite hard to look at. We continue to work and look for people who can answer those questions. And, so many things come up. We will probably have other webinars as appropriate on the way to other in-person meetings. And of course, we continue to hope to support the drafting, or rather the small group that came out of the steering committee, rather, that is trying to shape the pilots. What's next, Tim?
Well, incredibly, there's other things to do. But thank you very much, Julian. Obviously, you've been busy. I don't know how you get any sleep, but thank you for that. Now we are going to move rapidly, if we can, to having you, Julian, and Suel. I know that you've been listening, not just speaking, but listening and reading the chat over the course of the last hour and a half plus. And I'm wondering if maybe I could turn to you two and see if there's anything that, a particular theme or subject matter that's come up, particularly as it relates to need for further clarity, that you might actually mention, and perhaps we can turn to other speakers here today in the panel and not on the panel for some responses, some for clarity, please. So over to one of you, at least.
Yeah. How do you want to go, Suhail? You want to start and trade off? You want me to start? How do you want to roll?
Kick it off.
Okay. All right. So yes, Suhail and I have been feverishly taking note of the questions and trying to categorize them into coherent groups of things to talk about, and also trying to note subcategories of all these things. It's a live and imperfect exercise, so please forgive us if we haven't captured quite everything or didn't capture it quite as precisely as any of the much more articulate questions may have. I'll just start by saying that one of the things I love about these webinars is the chat function, because it is such a lively exchange and there's so much information that comes out. And so really want to thank everybody for putting in your as we say in this country, 2 cents into the chat and making it an enriching experience as we have these exchanges. So let's see. Well, let's start with some of these are classic hits, but in truth, the questions have the subtleties and the nuances in them that are really where the interesting stuff lies. But let's start with a very common one, the one that we're all looking at all the time, which is money in. Is there money flowing into the Cali Fund? Are we any closer to success since COP16? I think many people have said, well, you can't judge the success just yet by the amount of money, because we're still working on tuning the details, making the conditions, and so forth. But in the chat, it's clear that some of you think that money in is ultimately the measure of success. Just when the conditions are well enough tuned to get that money in remains a question. To my knowledge, no one has contributed past the initial $1,000 or so. But again, as we move through these other topics, we'll get to more subtleties on the money in. I do appreciate this question of what is the root of the hesitancy of contributions. We did talk a lot in Leuven about trust, but I think, as others have pointed out in this conversation, trust may not be quite the right frame for what is causing hesitation, but rather finding the right conditions to make those contributions. Suhail, I'll kick it over to you for the next one. We have like 20 of these guys, so be patient with us.
Yeah, there's a lot, but maybe we'll do it in the way that we'll just raise 2 topics each and then give it back to the panel. And then if we still have time, all right. So of course, disbursement was at stake as well, and also in relation to the accountability. And what was interesting was, of course, then the importance of IPLCs in the disbursement question, but of course also to motivate contributions, because there apparently it is quite it seems to be attractive for industry to and incentivize industry to put money in the fund. The more it is clear that it will directly be received by IPLCs. And another question that was on capacity building, and where more capacity is needed to find workable solutions, in particular when it comes then, for example, to disbursement questions and accountability, because apparently there might not be the capacities on the ground, but also need for capacity development when it comes to building up national capacities for sequencing, loading up and analyzing DSI. And that, of course, goes together with the discussion related to non-multi-benefit sharing, where we got a contribution that lined out types of non-multi-benefit sharing, which is good, of course, when you can report on that. But much more important it is, where is the progress now on non-multi-benefit sharing? Is there already a registry for such schemes? How do we get this ball rolling? So maybe indeed money in, what Julian has referred to, and then this question of, capacity building, non-multi-benefit sharing, and disbursement.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. If I could have the panelists' cameras on, please. And while you're putting them on, I have to remind you, we have 5 minutes left for this session. So there's no need to take the floor, but you're encouraged to. And if you do, very briefly try and at least respond to one element that's been raised. And I think the exercise itself is actually quite useful as well. So thank you, Julian. Thank you, Sue. So anyone from the panel feel pressed to say something, to respond one way or another? Going once, twice. Right. So we have, yep, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I didn't want to cut short the richness of the chat and just acknowledge that there's so much more in there, particularly as it relates to both the question of well, there's lots of questions, but national implementation. It seems like there might be some interesting experiences that we can learn from, both in Brazil and India. But then this question, this question of legal certainty or creating the conditions to collect resources. But I thought it was interesting in the chat that both legal certainty is we've talked about it in the past for industry, but then several people in the chat noted that, well, it would also be nice to have legal certainty to ensure that the rights of IPLCs in these conversations are ensured, and in particular as it relates to allocation. And also that that parties can be legally certain that that benefits will be shared for access to the data that comes from the sovereigns, which I thought was an interesting twist on it. And then the notion that we have to start somewhere, and if we start contributions, perhaps in this pilot question, testing the system, the sooner we can move to certainty. You know, it's like we can't quite go from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in a second. We have to start slowly and build it up. So that and noting also that perhaps the certificate work as it develops will be good for legal certainty, and noting also that legal variability across jurisdictions is a fact of life. So there may be a limit to the amount of legal certainty that we can have across the whole thing. And finally, just on pilots, I mean, I continue to sense a lot of interest in the pilots and its utility for moving the ball forward, and also some questions like if a pilot is by definition smaller than the full functionality of the system, how can you do it in such a way that it doesn't affect the modalities that have already been established in the system? So let me pause there. Sorry, Tim, go ahead.
Super. No, not at all. Thank you, Julian. Sue, anything further from your side?
I think Julian said it all, maybe with one little exception, and it is our old dance around the definition. Yeah, the definition of DSI, and to what extent we really need to be precise and hammer out terms in order to get exactly what many refer to, the legal certainty.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, and that, of course, as you both know, came up in Leuven, and I do think further discussion on this would be useful. And I think I sense that people feel the same way. Whether they have the same view is another matter, but that's the point of having discussion and analysis. So thank you very much, Julian and Suel. We're going to move to some closing remarks because Ida, our speaker, is up against the wall in terms of time, as other people on the line. So hello, Ida. Please, the floor is you. Do I have to introduce you? I should. Yes, this is Ida Helmark from NORAD in Oslo, and a very active and strong supporter of the work that we've been doing. So please, Ida, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tim. And yes, I can assure you that you noticed that the people on the pictures from the ATEG and the steering committee are happy. I was attending the ATEG meeting, and it was indeed a challenge, but it was a great injection of hope, I think, as well. They were actually moving forward. So with that comes the smile. So I just wanted to thank you all, presenters and panelists, for this really rich discussion. Thank you all participants that are listening actively, and also really good and interesting comments in the chat. So thank you for being so active. I think that this webinar has again provided me with further information and different views and aspects of the MLM and the Cali Fund. It's the things coming up again and again, but I think, in terms of incentives, definitions, legal certainty, non-monetary benefits, and so on and so forth, I think we're, at least for every discussion we have, at least I think we get one step further. So that's a good thing. And then I also noticed that there is a lot going on. So if someone outside of this webinar, please enlighten your colleagues that there is a lot going on, both from the formal work, as we have heard from the Secretariat, with all these studies and all the work that's going on for the SBI 7 and up to COP 17. And then also, as you heard from our colleagues here on the informal work, so the Informal Dialogue Partnership, you've seen that there are regional meetings, there's webinars, there's knowledge products. So please, I encourage you all to attend and constructively contribute so that we can together find solutions and convergence. And if you have any constructive ideas, please send a mail. The mail is in the chat, and I think also the organizers can send that email address when they send out the summary from this webinar. I also noticed the interest in the pilot, which was very clear from the Leuven dialogue. And I think that is a great and interesting way to move forward, to really test this out in practice. And also noting very clearly that the pilot is rather the rule than the exception that was mentioned here today. And again, on that, I think we should acknowledge that the Cali Fund and the MLM is a new animal to this multilateral world that we are having today, and also be a little bit patient, I think, even though we are urgently wanting more funding for nature. So with that, I also liked the comment from Bart that we're partnership for the sake of biodiversity, that even we have divergent views, we are in it for the bigger cause. We had to sometime go back to that bigger purpose, I think, so that we can get some energy from that, and then from that move to convergence. So with 1 minute left, I just wanted to thank also the EU for great partnerships. So again, it's all about partnerships here. It's very welcome for all efforts that want to contribute to the progress from to MLM and the Cali Fund going towards COP 17. And I think, from my point of view, if we make progress on all the aspects that has been covered today and in the DSI dialogue, if we make small steps on all those aspects, that's a big step. So even if there's not much funding yet, making progress on all those aspects leads towards the funding coming in as well. So I want you to remember that as the final word from me today. So again, thank you all for taking your time, and I hope you have a great day, night, morning, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ida, for your inspiring words, and Mary for your inspiring words at the front end. Just to remind everyone, the chat will be saved and embodied into the report of the webinar. And we're not quite finished, because when this webinar terminates, there will be a brief evaluation form will pop up, and we ask you to please fill it in. It'll only take a matter of seconds for you to do so, and to certainly improve what we deliver in the future. So this does conclude the webinar today. Thank you again to all the speakers. Thank you to the partnership. Thank you to our supporters of the informal work. And thank you, interpreters, for your fine work today. And thank you, everyone, for being and joining this webinar. Very much appreciated. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Muchas gracias. Take care, and goodbye for now.